You're listening to Marcus Gill Presents Antarctica Expert Interviews. Get the most out of your Antarctica adventure by learning practical how-to knowledge and listening to the fascinating stories shared by the world's leading experts on your Antarctica itinerary. And be sure to read the video description for more information on how to prepare for your own Antarctica cruise. Now, here's Marcus.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Antarctica Expert Interviews. This is a fascinating one because our guest today, Einar Torfi, is an absolute expert in navigating long-term, really difficult terrain, both in the North Pole and the South Pole. He does specialize primarily in the Arctic, but I just want to give you this little tidbit about our guest. He actually traveled 700 miles from the edge of Antarctica to the South Pole. That's just one of his many accomplishments. He also has specialized training in search and rescue in the most remote parts of the world. And he does primarily operate in Greenland and in the Arctic. He does short trips, he does long-term trips, but he's just a really interesting, very low-key individual. If there's ever someone that you wanted to rely on when you're in the most remote part of the earth, I without a doubt would recommend reaching out to Einar. He is the co-owner of Arctic Hiking and Expeditions. So Chris Templeton, our host and producer, does a fantastic job with this interview. So this is Chris interviewing Einar on preparing clients on traveling both for short and long expeditions on the coldest parts of our planet. I'll let you get to it.
Now, here is your host, Chris Templeton.
I'm really pleased to be here with a seasoned pro, if there ever was one, Einar Torfi. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
It's our pleasure. Einar, talk a little bit about your background and how you got into this. You've been doing this a long time and really since you were a kid in a lot of ways.
Well, I mean, my background is that I'm raised by parents that are nature lovers. As a boy, my father insisted in buying me cross-country skis, not downhill. So at school, I was the only kid with cross-country skis at the time because they were not so much in the capital area in Iceland. And I remember a ski trip with the school where, 600 kids and everyone was on downhill skis except me. But then that paid off later because as a teenager, I started joining trips with the local alpine club. And at the age of 18, I joined a local mountain rescue team. And then it really paid off because I was really used to do trips on the Nordic skis. So, yeah.
As a kid, as a teenager, doing this kind of thing, what was really compelling for you about it? What really hooked you?
My generation in Iceland, many of us, we were sent to stay at farms during summer. And I was sent to a farm in the east of Iceland that was quite remote at the time. No electricity, very complicated communication with, in terms of roads. So I had to fly 1 hour with an airplane and then drive for 2 hours in a four-wheel drive. And I loved the place, and the people were very nice with me, farmer and his wife. And I kind of found in my heart that the outdoors was something for me. From that, I was like 8 or 9. Yeah, and then some things are like coincidences, and I'm raised in a house on the outskirts of Reykjavik, where my mom lived downstairs and her sister upstairs, and my cousin, who's a year younger than I am, was also doing some cross-country skiing and stuff. And I think he, before me, joined a trip with the Alpine Club. And because we were close in age, there was also, competition between us. So if he did it, I had to do it, and the other way around. So I think it was because he had been on an Alpine Club trip that I needed to go, and I loved it. So then we went again for more different courses.
So talk a little bit about how you got into these longer expeditions and into guiding, where you were actually out for days at a time, and then actually becoming a guide.
Yeah, well, like I said, I knew in my heart that I was into the outdoors, so it was just a question what I could do to be there, and probably one thing came after another. I mean, as a teenager, my first real summer job was to work as a worker in a national park. And then I got to know the rangers. So I found that was something interesting. So when I had the age to become a ranger, I did the ranger training. And at the age of 21, I was a ranger in a national park up North Iceland. And at that time, me and my cousin, we were also starting to... We had been doing the mountain training with the local mountain rescue for a while. We started to go on courses longer courses, like in Scotland, Norway, the Alps. And the local touring club started to ask us to do some winter trips with the touring club. So like one thing led to another, and both of us liked the guiding. So then I got a job offer when I was 23 to become a full-time summer guide for French groups. I had to learn French very quickly, so I got like 10 weeks to be good enough to lead French clients. So that was a good challenge. And I mean, I really, at that moment, I found I was on the right shelf. And I started in the winter to do week-long trips to the Highlands on cross-country skis, and then they asked me to do the crossing of Iceland. I think that was probably when I was more like 25, 26 when I did my first crossing of Iceland, and I thought that was a big adventure too. Weather-wise, the crossing of the Icelandic Highlands is a very challenging trip because it's really windy. And yeah, it was an excellent lesson for me for future expedition guiding, and I really liked it. So there we are.
So when you think about becoming a guide and starting a business, what were some of the things that you felt put you in a place where you could really excel at this and be in a place where you could take tourists and people that wanted to go on these expeditions and really have a solid sense of where you're going, how you're going to make this trip a success for these people? Talk a little bit about kind of starting.
Yeah, I think it's a good question actually, because when you're young, part of it is actually a little bit of overconfidence. So because you don't really realize what could go wrong. So you're a bit overconfident, and then, but a little bit by a little bit in time, that is replaced with the experience and confidence based on experience. So in the beginning, and I think that's the case for any young guide, you have to dare a little bit because you don't have all the experience. But also what's really helpful here is that the weather or the climate is violent, and so bad weather experience is something that you have from very early. We had been doing the mountain rescue training, and mountain rescue training basically is the way that training is done whatever weather is. Only it has to be really bad so that they cancel a training. That was the base that gave me the best confidence, I think. Also, I had to learn to use compass and the map because it was before GPS. And we were working on 100,000 scale, so you actually got very good training with orientation.
What do you mean by 100,000 scale?
So 1 centimeter is like 100,000 centimeters on the ground. So that's like 1 kilometer or what? Like almost like 60% of a mile or something like that.
Right. When you look back at kind of that young, adventuresome guide that you were when you started, and you look at how you guide now, what's changed? What do you think that the differences are as a seasoned guide that have helped you?
Well, I mean, there are many things, but like in the beginning, when you're young and you have clients that are, could be your parents, you kind of need to take your space. Now it comes very easily. It's automatically, I get the respect that I had to fight for a little bit when I was a younger guide. So that's one thing. Another thing is maybe, the clients simply read in my behavior that I do have a lot of experience. I hope at least that they feel like they can trust me, and so they are at ease. But I mean, if you put yourself in the shoes of someone who's going on a serious trip with quite a young guide, it's normal that they are a little bit skeptical until he has proven a little bit that he's worth the trust. So I had to earn that in the beginning days. That's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now it comes more
almost like the experience that you have under your belt just kind of flows from you, and people have a much stronger sense of that right out the gate.
I think so. And also what comes with age and experience is also a much better understanding of people and how they are different, but that we all have something in common. And you have to respect that and just be kind, It's a little bit about, just being lovable, actually, just be nice.
When you think about the different personality types that you've encountered over the years, what are the things that are common about them that help you to move people? Obviously, kindness makes a big difference in terms of, if I'm kind, people are probably going to listen to me a little more carefully than not. But what are the things that you see in people that are going on these expeditions that they have in common?
Yeah, good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is the need to be in nature. Is how how it makes them relax. Many of my clients are in demanding daytime jobs, sometimes a bit stressing jobs, and it's just how they can, breathe out, breathe in, and get the stress out of their body. So they have a need, and how the outdoors kind of makes them relaxed. So that's what most of them have in common. And then for a certain part, it's also a certain lust for adventure. So, yeah. But after that, having said that, the people I get on trips are quite, a various kind of a group, like lots of different types of personalities,
It's interesting to me that for so many of the people that you've guided over the years, there is that background or come from a high stress background. What is it about being on this kind of an expedition where it's certainly not easy? It requires a lot of preparation. What is it about these expeditions that helps people that come from these high stress positions to relax from your standpoint?
If we take like a strenuous ski expedition, like the crossing of Greenland, it's actually kind of a perfect way for mindfulness, because life is about very simple things. You have 1.5 hours you have to walk or ski, pulling a sled. Then you have a break. And then you have another 1.5 hours, and you repeat this 4 times a day or something. Then you have to put up camp and, make a shelter if the wind is strong, make a shelter for toilet. It's all the same again and again. So it's repeating itself day after day. And when you start to just watch your tips of your ski for 1.5 hours, just, your mind starts to wander, and it's the perfect mindfulness, Mm-hmm. You kind of, you're there, you can't be elsewhere. And that's the same for me as a guide in many ways, that, life becomes very simple when you're doing that. And, you leave other things, troubles or whatever, behind during that period. So
the other thing that occurs to me, you talked about how windy it can be, is there's a certain element of adversity that for some reason helps with that mindfulness, helps us to kind of find our center, our core. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Let's talk a little bit about somebody who's going on one of these expeditions. What do you define as being a really good fit for this? What are some of the things that you look for that say, in somebody who's going on an expedition with you, this person is a good fit?
The most important is the mindset. To be able to stay in a small group with different characters of people, and do your part of the job, and being happy about it. So you need to be good in communication with other people. Then of course they need to be fit, and they need to have some experience, in easier conditions prior to a hardcore expedition.
What are some of the things that you recommend for somebody who's going on an expedition to really have them be fit and to be in that mindset that's going to serve them through this?
Well, preferably I want my clients to have done easier trips and stepping slowly up, in experience. So I don't take someone crossing Greenland that has no prior experience in that kind of expeditions. But yeah, so I think that's the main thing, is that you build up your experience the right way. And one of the things you preferably need is just to have experience with bad weather, because that teaches you how to dress correctly in different conditions. Then of course, you should not be a beginner skiing. You need to have trained a bit on skis. So, yeah, if you were starting from zero, I would then first recommend that you would do like a beginner's course on Nordic skis, then join a club like mine, or do maybe a week-long trip or something like that. Step by step, gaining the experience.
When you look at somebody preparing for this, let's talk a little bit about gear. What are the things that they need to be thinking about? Somebody who's maybe a first timer who's going to go on a shorter trip and start to build that experience. What gear do they need to be thinking about?
Well, proper clothing is the most important. Preferably this wool, 3-layer wool, insulation layers, and then the shell. So that's the basic for everywhere. And then, of course, in the colder climates, then you need, instead of a normal shell, you might need insulated overtrousers and insulated jackets, or more layers. Like, on the South Pole, on top of the usual 3 layers, on my upper body, for every break, I have 2 down jackets I put on, one thin and one thick. So yeah, I mean, basic of all equipment is the proper clothing. And I say wool rather than synthetics, because on long journeys, the wool smells much less.
Are there any brands from a clothing standpoint that you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, there are many. There's a Norwegian brand called Bergans. They're excellent. They have competitors like Devold from Norway, Icebreaker. It's a very good brand as well. In overgarments like shell and down clothing, I both used clothing from Mountain Equipment and RAB or RAB in the UK. But it's lots of different producers produce good stuff.
One of the things that occurs to me is that extremities are also probably as or more important in terms of feet and hands to protect. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, when you go into real cold conditions, like on the ice cap of Greenland or the South Pole, you preferably need to have more insulation in your shoes than normally. So you buy expedition boots. And there's a producer in Norway called Alpha that probably is the best one for that. And then for your hands, you need to have insulated over mittens, quite thick. And this is for temperatures like colder than minus 20 Celsius with wind. So where you have, the wind chill factor at maybe minus 30 to minus 40 degrees Celsius. So quite cold, and then I also, in my expedition boots, I wear double socks. So I have 2 thick socks on. Some people prefer only to have 1 pair, but I always have 2 pairs in my winter boots.
In regards to what you should bring, the other side of that is what shouldn't you bring? What are the things that you don't want people to bring?
Well, not too much of clothing. So what's really important on a long trip like that is to keep the weight to the minimum necessary. So the main thing is that you can't bring many pullovers or many underwear. You have to accept that you're going to be dirty. and so, like, for a month expedition, I might changed underwear once, and that's it, So this is a key thing. And also, of course, for long expeditions, another even more important factor is that food has to be exactly chosen and weighed to be as nutritious and energetic as possible, but at the same time as lightweight as possible. So you're counting calories and grams, basically. So for an expedition of 1 month, like the Greenland crossing, you want the weight of your sled to not exceed 80 kilograms, 160 pounds at the beginning of the trip. And for a small person, preferably a bit less even.
Another thing that occurs to me in regards to preparation is, and you mentioned it in passing, is this is not an individual thing. This is something that requires a tremendous amount of teamwork, doesn't it?
I mean, an expedition, of course. I mean, everyone of the expedition needs to participate in the chores of the day. And if you have many inactive members of a group, then that's not a good group. And so, yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, when I was talking about the mindfulness, it's repetitive, but of course people switch from one role to another. So to make, today it's this team that makes the toilet, and another team is going to do the melting of the snow for drinking water. And you could then have another team tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Another thing that I do, normally I have one bigger tent where I always stay, but I rotate the people that are with me between tents so that they are not always in the same, same groups. And rotating is more fun actually for most people, because then they're meeting, different characters. So they're staying 2 or 3 nights in this tent, and then they're moving to another, or someone else is moving. So, breaks up the day.
When you look at all of your expeditions and how people start at the beginning and end at the end, what are the things that you think people are most surprised by at the end of a trip in terms of the meaning of it, that sort of thing?
I think we're going back to the mindfulness. I think people sometimes expect that their head is full of, poetry or something, while actually what happens is that you kind of empty your mind of anything that is not needed for the moment. So instead of writing famous books in your head, you're just happy being there. And I think that's what surprises people most, is maybe how simple life becomes and how relaxing that is.
And there's something really powerful about that simplicity, I imagine, that create, at some level, I feel like so much of what we chase in our day-to-day lives is, well, if I have this or do that, or that all of a sudden there's going to be this, if I keep adding, there's going to be all this great stuff. And yet really what I think I hear you saying is the value of this simplicity is how much meaning is there.
I mean, you're happy to see a slightly different form on the snow surface, or a different shape on a sastrugi, and it makes you happy to see that, or just a different way of, skies, no clouds in the sky, sorry. It doesn't need to be complicated to enjoy it, actually. And you see a flock of birds pass you on the ice cap, and it makes your day,
Simple, but powerful.
Yeah.
Last question. when you look back on your career, what is it that keeps you excited about doing this every day?
I think it's the fact that I have varied quite a bit. I've tried to do a lot of different stuff. I've tried to avoid to be repetitive too much. Like the Greenland crossing, I've done 5 times in 25 years. And I've done a lot of other stuff in Greenland and in Iceland. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something you put in books or registers. It's just enjoyable when you're trying something new every time. So, yeah, I think that is the best thing for me is that I have varied a lot.
Einar Torfi, you are with Arctic Hiking and Expeditions. You can be found at arctichiking.gl and also on Instagram at Arctic_hiking. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this and to help our audience to be better prepared for a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Marcus Gill Presents Antarctica Expert Interviews. And be sure to read the video description for more information on how to prepare for your own Antarctica cruise.